All right, and so really the whole point of this session is to go through some of the options that you can use in Blackboard to provide feedback for your students. So a lot of it will kind of be based on being in the grade center and those options for providing feedback, but there's also, when you do provide feedback, there's some additional options that allow you to access the full content editor, attach files and feedback and things like that as well. There's also an option there where you can provide audio video feedback for students in any assignments that have been submitted or really any grading area. So even for discussions, journals, if you do create a column yourself, you are able to provide some AV feedback that way as well. We could also go through tests and how to leave feedback both on multiple choice questions as well as essay questions where you can provide feedback to individual students for their answers. And then we have some additional options there, and we'll see if we get to it at the end there for setting up anonymous grading, as well as a general overview of using rubrics and how that would look for students. So I guess I'll give the disclaimer for rubrics is that that's pretty much a session on its own, but we'll at least go through a little bit of an overview with it. So yeah, so this is kind of the framework for what we'll be talking about here. Just really general overview of also some benefits for providing feedback in Blackboard. I think a big thing there is really the collection of current and past assessments, and also being able to have it in one centralized location where if you did want to go back and see how a student did on that one assignment, it is all there and centralized for them. With the instructor app, you can pretty much grade on the go. It works pretty good with allowing you to access submissions by students as well as to have some of these areas where you can provide feedback to them. Allows tracking and allowing you to see the overall picture as a whole there as well. And it's a good thing too, instructor presence is there. So if you do provide some of this individual feedback that's personalized to the students, a great way of having some presence there and showing your engagement in the class. Actually, I should say before I go on to this slide here, in the lower left-hand corner of the slide, you could write down that address and that will give you a copy of these slides. There's some resource links throughout, so really downloading these and then you'll be able to access some of those additional links there for some of these other resources that have been posted throughout. So I'll give you a second to write that down if you wish now, and I'll also put the slide up at the end if you wanted to write down the address at that time as well. All right, so yeah, I'll put that slide up at the end as well if you wanted to copy it down there. But also, there's some resources on this site for really defining some good feedback. So really, some of these things very briefly of making sure that you post it in a relatively good time frame after the assignments are due and grading. And I'm also a big believer in letting students know when this feedback will be there instead of them always having to check Blackboard to see if you posted it. So within 3 days, within 5 days of the assignment due dates, things like that as well. Consistently on all the different assessments that you're having throughout your course. It's provided in a good personalized way that way as well. One thing that's there too is there's that point of, will students understand what you're saying? So if you do think about providing some written feedback, but also do record a brief AV feedback here in Blackboard, that could also get your point across in multiple formats there as well. So there's some other tips here on this slide. So if you do download the presentation, you could read some of those resources and additional links there. So yeah, and Sony mentioned if I can send the presentation at the end of the presentation. Yes, definitely. With this group, I think I'll be able to send it here to the three of you, and I'll put that slide up at the end as well for the link to get to the slides. So one of the first things is really posting quick comments and feedback to learners. So I'm actually going to hop out of these slides and into a Blackboard section here. So give me 1 second to transition to my tab that's open. And so everyone should be able to see this now here with the Grade Center. So I think one of the easiest ways, there's a couple different ways to actually get the columns in the Grade Center. So if you do create an assignment submission link in your class, a Grade Center column will automatically be created for you. However, I know that a lot of people also create manual columns, and really just by going up to this create column button and then creating a column that way. So that's probably one of the more popular ones, and that's then students could get the submissions to you anyway, or if you have a different type of assessment that doesn't necessarily have a submission link and things like that, so you can create a column this way. So in terms of adding feedback to here, it's pretty simple, where you just have to click on the cell, enter in the amount of points for the students, and then click enter. And after you add in the amount that they received for that column here, or for this assignment, what you can do is you can click on this downward pointing arrow, and there's an option here for quick comments. And a couple things here is that, one, you could just provide some basic feedback to the learner here. This is what students would see. You could also provide some grading notes, which is just for you, the instructor. So if there are any additional notes of why you wanted to give the student that points amount and things like that, you can just put them in these notes. But one thing that's kind of hidden here is down at the bottom, there's this button for text editor. And if I click on the text editor, you actually are able to have the full content editor at your use. So you will be able to attach files, images, put in some additional text that's might be easier to type in this way than using that small feedback to learner box that comes up initially. And one thing we'll go over a little bit later here too is that you also have the option for inserting a recording. So this is that audio video feedback I was talking about. So really, to go through these steps one more time, first I put in the points that the student received. I click this downward pointing arrow. I went to quick comments, and that gives you that little box here where you can type in your message or feedback to the learner, or you can type in this or click on this text editor button, and that gives you this full content editor at your disposal here. So it's a little hidden, a little more out of the way, especially since you have to put the points in first and then get to that quick comment box and then click on that text editor box that's hidden down there at the bottom. So that's one nice thing here too, is that you're not related to that little text box to type in. So the next part, that was really the creating the manual column here. The next one was for providing feedback for assignments that have been submitted. So this is kind of the preferred way that we would recommend students submit their assignments to you through Blackboard, so that you have it all collected in one spot. You are able to download all the, if they did have a Word documents and things like that, you're able to download that. And so you could have that actual Word file there as well if you want to read it that way in Word. And so then you have a whole collection of the submissions from your class in one set, and you're able to provide that feedback this way. So for the assignments, two ways that you can get to it. You could either go through, if you click on Grade Center and Needs Grading, it will bring up the list of assignments that have been submitted to you. Or if you go into the Grade Center, you will see these little exclamation mark icons here that shows that it needs grading. So for this example, I'm going to go here to the downward pointing arrow next to it, and I could view the attempts. And what this will do is we'll bring up the student's attempt on the left-hand side of the screen here. And then over on the right-hand side is where that assignment details and feedback box will come up. So two things that you can do is you could either type in the amount of points that they received. If you do that way, you'll notice that that feedback to learner box pops up on the side. There's also on the left-hand side, there's some annotation tools here. So if you did want to kind of mark up this paper, and I'm just gonna check the chat here. So Maureen asked, can you have students submit via Blackboard, but create it without an automatic grade column? Since she's already created Blackboard grade system and don't want to redo all the columns. Yes, so really what you can do for that is if you've already set up the grade center and you want them to have the assignment submission links, we could probably do the best way for that was probably to set up the submission links, but for the possible points for the assignment, you can just make that a 0. And then basically the submissions and the point totals won't get thrown off. The other thing you can do too is that if you do create the assignment submission link with the amount of points the students can receive, you could also then go back and delete those previous columns. But I know that sometimes if you do have weighted grades and things like that, it can get kind of tricky. So passive least resistance would probably be to create the submission links, but give them 0 for the amount of points for that assignment, and then you could use that other column to provide your feedback and things like that as well. So over here on the left side, the paper will come up. There's some basic annotation tools. This is the box tool, which isn't quite as good as what was there before, which was Crocodoc, which allowed for a bit more annotated feedback there. I know that this tool at some point is going to be replaced, and they're working on that. But for basic comments of drawing on the paper submissions, as well as putting in some of these additional comments, those are there for you to use. But the main thing I want to kind of point out over here is this feedback to learner box on the side. So once again, you can type in the point total, or you can click on this very small downward pointing arrow here, and that will bring up the feedback to learner box where you can type in some basic text here. But once again, there's some additional options there that are kind of way at the bottom. So if you did want to attach a file, you could click on that little paperclip icon. I know that some people like to download a Word document, make all the changes and comments in Word and track changes and things like that as well, and then reattach it for the students. So in that process, you'd be able to do that by clicking on the submission link here at the bottom, and that would download the Word documents that they submit. That would download it to your computer. You could do all those track changes and comments if you want to in Word. And then what you could do is click on this insert file icon here to reattach that file for the students within their feedback. So that's one option that you can do that. The other thing is that this A icon, which I think this is really the only time in Blackboard where this A icon is used to bring up the full content editor. So if I click on that A, once again, it comes up with that feedback to learner box where, once again, you could attach files, you could link to other websites and resources, and basically anything that you can do in terms of building your content in your course, you could also put it in your feedback. In addition to that is this microphone icon here for inserting audio and video feedback. So I could type in text feedback here, and then I can click on this microphone icon to insert a recording. And to show you what that looks like, it pops up in a new window. So give me 1 second to change my view here in Collaborate. What this does is that it basically will bring up a recording screen that is built on the same sort of tools that Collaborate Ultra uses. So you'll see down at the bottom, there's that familiar microphone icon as well as the webcam. So if I did want to turn on my webcam, I can enable it here. Otherwise, you can just record audio feedback. So by doing that, so it just gives you a little bit of a time. And so then you can start recording your feedback for the assignments and for the students. And once you're done, you can click on that stop button, where you'll then be able to preview what you recorded. And then down in the lower right-hand corner, you could either delete the recording, or if it's good, you can click on the save and exit button. And just to make sure, yeah, so you're able to see the same thing still. You can give it a recording name, so feedback for Mike here, and then I can click insert recording. And so let me share the screen here again for the assignments. All right, so after I clicked on that save and exit button, what happens is that I still have that text feedback that I left for the students. And then I also have this little icon here for the audio feedback that I recorded. And I'll go into a student view here in a second so you can see what they will see on their screen with it. But you're able to really just kind of a combination of text and audio feedback. It will show up in both ways here. So if I click on submit here, then I click on submit over there to submit it, then it's graded for the students. And what I'll do is I will go into my student preview mode here, just to show you what the student side of this will see. So if I go into my grades, and this was, yeah, this assignment feedback here. Students will see assignment feedback. They'll see the amount of points that they receive, so 90 out of 100. I'll also see that there is some additional feedback there using this little bubble here. So if I click on that bubble, I'm able to see the written text that was left for me, as well as this audio video icon, where if I click on that, it will pop up in a new screen with that player that I'd listen to the recording. What I'm also able to do is if I click on the actual student or the assignment name over here, I'm able to see those annotated tools that were used on the paper, as well as on the right-hand side, the feedback that was left for me with the text and that audio video feedback there. So really the recommended way is probably if they click on my grades, and then you could alert them to click on the assignment name. That will allow them to see that whole kind of overview of annotated tools, their paper, as well as that additional feedback to learner that was left for them on the right-hand side here. So I'm going to exit out of student preview mode. I'll pause here a moment. We're going to go into tests here pretty briefly of setting up feedback, automatic feedback for multiple choice questions, as well as how to leave individual feedback for text-based questions or essay questions there as well. So any questions on this first part, or basic assignments and grade center columns and leaving feedback to the learner? All right, so Tony mentioned, is there a way to know that they read the feedback? I do not think there's any tracking capabilities on this feedback, so unfortunately not for that one. All right, so one thing that we'll do now is we'll start going into tests, and there's two ways, and I've created two examples here that we could show. There's a multiple choice test that I created, as well as an essay-based test here. So first of all, start off with multiple choice, and this will be general correct, incorrect type of feedback for the students, since it is based off of their answers here. So the one thing with providing feedback on multiple choice tests is that you actually create this feedback and enter this feedback when you are creating the test questions. So I have a multiple choice test example here. I'm going to go in and I'm going to go to edit the test. And this is a screen that you usually see when you are adding questions to a test and things like that. So I'm going to edit this question just to show how this looks here. So I have my question, I have my question text, I have my possible answers here, and then beneath these boxes is a feedback section. And so you could add in feedback, which is automatic for students for if they'd selected the correct response, as well as some additional feedback there for if they clicked on the incorrect response. So you can fill in these boxes, and this is the feedback they would receive, whether they selected the correct or incorrect answer here. But other things to kind of point out too is that once again, you kind of have that full content editor minus the audio video feedback part in this section. But you are able to add in text if you wanted to link to a website. You are able to link to outside resources as well for maybe why it was correct or incorrect, or for an example. Same thing if you want to do a link to a video, you can put in the link here, link to it, or you can use this HTML button to actually embed the video in their feedback for the students as well. So once again, pretty much anything that you might do in the content editor for your content sections in your class, you're able to do in this feedback for the students for their test questions and multiple choice. So I'm going to cancel since we have that set up. And one thing that I want to kind of go over really quick is the options that you need to enable to allow students to see that feedback. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Edit Test Options. And these are the options and settings that you would initially set up for when you're deploying the test in your class. So you have the name for it, whether it's available to students, if there is a timer, and the amount of set time for the class, as well as the display until and after dates there. But what I'm going to go down to is that there's this section here for show test results and feedback to students. So just to go through some of these options here, you could set it up for when students will actually see this feedback in their test results. So you could have it so that it will be automatic right after they submit the test, whether it's a one-time view where they see it and we're able to review it one time and then they won't be able to really go back and review it again. If you want this feedback and results to show on a specific date, so if you're worried that students might take the test, see all the results, and save it and possibly send it to a classmate and things like that, you could actually have it so that on a certain day, everyone will see it at one time. You could have it set so that it's after due dates or after the availability date that you have in these test options here. Or you could have it so that's after all the students have taken the test, then after all those attempts are submitted, then that feedback will show up. So you can kind of pick that range of availability here. But then over to the right-hand side, you can show how much they receive per question, whether it's all the answers as well as the correct and their submitted answer. So this would show all the possible answers, as well as the correct answer, as well as what they submitted in the test for that question. And then that additional feedback that's left for that correct, incorrect answers here, that would be checked under the feedback column here. So this is what you'd have to check to see that incorrect feedback that was left for them. So those are kind of the options here. I think by default, when it shows up initially, yeah, it's not going to show me this view here, but it's pretty limited in that it will show it up. By default, it will show after submission and the score per question. So a lot of this other stuff here, especially this feedback box, isn't checked by default. So if you do want to see that feedback for the test, really make sure that this feedback box is checked here. And then to go into a student view for this, I'm going to go to My Grades. And I'm going to go down to the multiple choice example, where I see that I got 10 out of 10 on that test, and I'm going to click on the test name. And for some reason, Blackboard has this one extra step here where they then have to click on the amount of points that they received under this calculated grade here. And so then I'm able to see my selected answer as well as the correct answer. And since I had show all answers, I'm able to see the other possible answers that I could have picked for this question. And then I have that response feedback box underneath here where it shows me that that text that I entered in for the correct response. So this, by checking all those boxes, students will be able to see all these options here. So it's kind of, at least in my opinion, I like to be able to check all those boxes so students are able to see what they selected, the correct response, the other possible answers, as well as that response feedback that was left for them. And let me go back here. So any questions on that multiple choice feedback section here? What we'll do next is we'll go in and we'll grade a essay test question to show how that looks as well. All right, so what we'll do is we'll go into, if you have an essay test or a question or a test that has any short answers or text-based questions that aren't automatically graded. Once again, you would actually, let me click out of student preview mode here. So for those tests that need grading manually, same thing, you could either go to needs grading, and let's see, I have this essay test here, and I can see the student attempt, or I can go into the full grade center, and I'll be able to see that this test needs grading in this section. So what I will do is I will click on this downward pointing arrow here for the essay test for this student, and I'll go to view their attempt. And so here you're able to pretty much automatically, you'll see their given answer for the question up here at the top, and you're able to provide the feedback this way. So I'll but great job again. But the same thing is you are able to add in links to resources, videos, things like that as well. Unfortunately, in this view here, that A/B feedback is not available. Mainly that's more for assessments and assignments. I guess this is an assessment, so but for some reason they didn't include it as feedback here, but they did in the other assignment areas. But this would be the feedback to the students. You could then give the amount of points that they received for the question up here in the upper right-hand corner of the question box. So really can type in the points here for that specific question, that additional feedback for the student here. And once set, you can just click on Submit. And then I only had one question in this essay example, but it will automatically tally up the amount of points that they receive for the entire test and pretty much enter it into the grade center. So for the student view, for how they would actually see this, pretty much the same as that multiple choice test. They would go to My Grades. They would go down to the essay test, where they click on the test name, and then they'd have to click on the amount of points that they received. And I must not have something set up here. So what I probably didn't do is click on those test and feedback settings. That was one of the things where I didn't want to necessarily grade this yet, so that I had the attempt already kind of set in the system, and so I could submit it while on this webinar here. But we're able to see those default options that I was describing before, that after submission, score per question, and then how the rest of these boxes are not checked by default. So I'm actually going to check all of these here. And now with these test settings, what I'm able to do is go into student preview mode, go to My Grades. I can go down to that essay test here and click on the test name, the amount of points that I received. And then for the test, I'm able to see the question, what my answer was that I wrote in, as well as that additional feedback that's the instructor left for me under that response feedback box. And I'll just pause here one more time. We're going to go on to the next part here about anonymous grading and how to kind of set that up and the reasons for that. So if there's any questions about this feedback for tests, you could ask any questions now. We could go through it a little further. All right, so the next option that I'll show you for in terms of grading and feedback is to grade anonymously. And with that, what you will see is basically that that there's been an assignment submission, but you're not able to see the student name. So this can kind of take away from grading biasness and things like that as well. And so really to kind of set that up, what I'll do is I will go into a section here and an assignment that I have set up. So I have this assignment here that's set for anonymous grading. Just to show you what this looks like and where to enable this option. If I'm creating an assignment, I can give it a name, instructions, due date, and point total. But under here, there's this grading options link. So this would be for when you are creating an assignment submission link. There is this option here to enable anonymous grading. So what this does is that student names are hidden during the grading process. I think the one thing that you would have to tell students about here is that um, they should leave their paper or their name off the top of the paper, things like that as well. So not putting any identifying information on their paper itself. They'll also get prompted about that for when they submit the assignment that it is going to be graded anonymously. So you could enable that here, and you could have it where the anonymous grading is disabled from your view, either on a specific date or after you have graded all of the submissions for that assignment. So after I do that, and I've already saved this, what you will see is a little bit of a different view here in the full grade center. So if I went to the full grade center, this is my assignment that I've enabled anonymous grading on. And you'll see that I'm not quite able to see if students have submitted their assignment yet or not, mainly because it's all anonymous. But what if I go to Grade Center Needs Grading, you will see a list of assignments that still need grading, and this is the one for anonymous grading. What you'll see here is that it's an anonymous student, and really just an attempt ID listed along with it. And that's where I can click, and I can click on that attempt. Once again, it shows up as an anonymous student at the top. I can go in, just like before, I could add in my feedback on the side here. So the feedback to learner, if I wanted to access that full content editor, I'm able to here as well. So I can also leave that audio video feedback if I wanted to on this assignment. And then I can click on submit. And since I have that set, I believe, for being the anonymous grading to go away on a certain date, it will remain there. So you can just kind of continue going into that needs grading area to grade the assignments, and then pretty much access the submissions that way. For the student view, let me see if this comes up here yet. If I go to my grades and I go to that anonymous assignment, they will be prompted and they'll see this little icon here that this assignment was graded anonymously. So there is some indications there for the student that this anonymous grading was there. Also, when they do go and submit their assignment, I don't think I'll be able to show that under instructor view, but I'll test it out here just to see. They will also be prompted and notified that, here it is. So when they go to submit their assignment, they are able to get this prompt here that anonymous grading is currently turned on for the assignments. So really another reminder here to remain anonymous, do not include your name or other identifying information to your assignment submission. So they are prompted with that when they go to submit their assignment. And I think one thing that I could also point out in terms of one other thing with anonymous grading is that you can set that up as you create the assignment submission link, or you could also, if you click on the right pointing arrow in the column name, there is also an option to, let's see if I can find the right one. Yeah, grade with usernames hidden. And that will also allow you to grade assignments here where their names won't necessarily be up here at the top of the window here for when you are grading the assignments. I think the one thing with this, hide student names. This is a little more after the fact, so they wouldn't necessarily be prompted to hide their names when they submit their assignments and things like that. So yeah, but there is that one secondary option for it as well. So let me exit out of here. Are there any questions about the anonymous grading part? All right, so like I mentioned at the start, rubrics are probably a session all on its own, but we'll kind of recap it here in the next 10 minutes or so. So Blackboard has the option to grade with interactive rubrics, and the way you would set that up is really quickly, you would go to Course Tools in your Course Management menu, and then you would go down to the Rubrics option. And this is where you would be able to create a rubric, and what happens is that you're brought to a screen where you can put in a name for the rubric, and then you can customize it further from there with the different criterias going down and to the right here, the levels of achievements, the amount of points that you should receive for each criteria, as well as a predefined description for that criteria. One general thing that I would recommend is for the rubric type to make it worth points. I believe by default it's set to percent, but sometimes that will kind of cause some confusion for how Blackboard handles it in terms of the amount of points that students receive. So I would definitely recommend next to rubric type to make it worth points instead of a percentage. So what you can do is you can go in, if you have additional criteria and additional columns and rows, you can use these buttons at the top here. Really, I just found a sample rubric online and copied this in for this example here and made it worth this points. So then what you would do is when you are creating your assignments submission link here, let me just go and click on the edit. So we're at the window for setting up an assignment submission link. You have those options, but under grading, there is this option for associated rubrics. And if you already created that rubric in that course menu and course tools option, you can select it. And actually, I'll just go through this process here overall. So I'll go to add rubric and select a rubric, and I'm going to click on this sample one that I created. And you'll be prompted with this little question here that's if it's okay to basically make the points possible based off of the rubric's points possible, which is all good. So I'll click OK there. And then one thing that's to point out is that usually it's good. This is used for grading. But over on the right-hand side, for some reason, the default option for showing the rubric to students is no. So if you do want students to be able to see your feedback for the rubric, you would have to change those options to yes. And I would select yes with the rubric scores. So they're able to see the amount of points that they received for each criteria here. And then I can click on submit. And that will allow us to grade with the rubric as well as show that feedback to students. So with that said, if I go to my full grade center, and I have this student submission here that needs grading, I will go in, I will view the attempt for that assignment, and we're taken to that familiar screen here with the annotated tools on the left, the feedback here on the right. But the one thing here is that now I have this option here that's this is my sample rubric and that it's used for grading. So if I click on the View Rubric in Window, let me change my screen that I'm sharing here so you're able to see it. There we go. So what happens is that the rubric will pop up in a new window. I'm able to go in, select how many, select the criteria that they received for that part of the assignment. In addition to selecting it, I can also leave individual feedback for that one section that I selected. So I'll just go through, check this off here. So I could leave feedback for an individual criteria. I'm also able to leave that feedback to the learner for the overall assignment here at the bottom as well. And the same thing here too is that overall it will calculate how many points that I received based off the rubric. But if I did want to change that a little bit as well, I could change the number of points. So maybe instead of a 5, I should have got a 7.5 in one section. So I'm able to kind of edit the rubric results here, right here at the bottom. And then I can click on Save. I'll go back and share that Grade Center window. So it's all set here with the amount of points. I graded through the rubric. I'll click on Submit, and then it's graded for that student here. So to show off the student view for this, since I did select that I want students to be able to see the rubric feedback with the amount of points associated with it, I will go into My Grades as a student. I will go down to this assignment with rubric. I see that feedback is there, but I'm going to click on the assignment name. And I'm able to see the attempt here. And then I'm also able to see this little icon here to view the rubric. So if I view the rubric, share my screen here in a different window that popped up. There we go. So I'm able to see which boxes I selected. If I left individual feedback for a specific criteria, it would show up in this section as well. Then I'm able to see that overall feedback to the learner that was left at the bottom of the assignment. So rubrics, you can play around a little more with by going to that course management menu and selecting on rubrics. It takes a little bit to kind of get it set up, but overall, if you do have a lot of assignments to grade and want to do it where those criteria are added up a little easier, then that's a good way to do it and try it out. So I think in the spirit of online learning and things like that as well, if you're not quite used to the rubric tool yet, you could always try it out on a small assignment, and then you could, as you get more familiar with it, you can pretty much use it on a larger assignment there as well. So let me just back here and I'll put this title screen up here. Really, from this point on, any questions about anything that we reviewed? I'll send out the slides to everyone, as well as if you wanted to access a download of them here, you can do so in the bottom left-hand corner. There's that tiny URL that will take you to a copy of these slides that you could download. As I mentioned, there's some resources there for feedback in general, and there's also how-to links for adding some of this feedback into some of these tools like assignments and adding feedback to tests there as well. And there's also a slide for also for student view. So little guide as well as a video in this guide here too for how students access some of this feedback as well. So yeah, any questions? Okay, great. Yeah. Thanks for joining, everyone. And so, yeah, any other questions that you might have, you could always email us at Learning Technologies as well. And we could always help you out a little further or guide you in the right direction if something doesn't look quite right. And yeah, we could help you out that way as well. So you could always let us know of any questions, and more than happy to respond back to you.